Well, Senator Tom Cotton is a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he's going to be on the Senate floor today, pointing out a few things that should have been done before, and things that could get done today to help address the coronavirus crisis that's really affecting our markets. Senator, welcome back.
Good morning.
Thank you. It's good to be back on with you.
Senator, you know, it's so vital that we move in the right direction as one country, not one party. What have you discovered that could have been done before that wasn't done that would have helped the situation out today?
You know, last week we passed a bipartisan supplemental spending bill to get help out to the front lines. But unfortunately, behind closed doors, the Democrats killed a vital provision to protect our great doctors and nurses. We need to make sure that we have the kind of masks available to protect our doctors and nurses whenever they're screening for coronavirus. So mask manufacturers like 3M and others asked for legal immunity to use industrial masks when screening for the coronavirus. These are the exact same kind of masks that doctors and nurses currently use. They're just not suitable for every medical purpose, but for an airborne illness like this, they're perfectly suitable. However, they reasonably fear ambulance-chasing lawyers trying to sue them in the future. So much like we give legal immunity to other medical device manufacturers, Republicans sought to have medical or legal immunity given to these mask manufacturers. Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats refused. They put huge fees for ambulance-chasing lawyers ahead of the safety of our doctors and nurses, and therefore ahead of public safety.
Right, so
that's a disgrace, and we need to fix it now.
So what do we do about it? Our doctors, our medical teams, they have to have these masks.
Yeah, so we should take a bill to the floor this week before we adjourn for a week-long recess to make sure that we protect the manufacturers of these masks so our doctors and nurses in the weeks ahead will be able to continue to provide medical care, not just for people with coronavirus, but for anything. It is vitally important that we give this kind of legal protection to those manufacturers, that we care more for public health and our great doctors and nurses rather than the ambulance-chasing lawyers who have Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in their back pocket.
All right. Senator, the list of members of Congress who are staying at home until the incubation period of 14 days expires is growing. The members under self-quarantine right now include Gates of Florida, Collins of Georgia, Meadows, who's going to be the chief of staff of the president, Brownlee, Cruz, and Gosar. Are people on Capitol Hill, are they preparing for the fact that they may have to self-quarantine, or are they talking more, for instance, your staff, about telecommuting, working from home?
Well, Steve, they're doing both. Congress, like any workplace, has a lot of people coming in and out of it, so there are prudent measures we can take, like stopping handshakes at the time or using more hand sanitizer, for instance. If a doctor recommends that you self-quarantine, please follow that doctor's advice. If you can telecommute, and there's reason to think you should, we should do that as well. But as long as the Congress is in session, we need to focus on passing the bills that will protect our people, like making sure that we pass legal protections for these mask manufacturers.
And when you talk about what the president's proposing yesterday, he's talking about taking some stimulus by having a payroll tax cut. He's also talking about people who make an hourly wage looking for protections. Looks like the House has got their own stimulus plan. What needs to be done in Tom Cotton's mind?
Well, Brian, as I've said now for 2 months since I first started focusing on this virus, we know that it will have economic implications. We've seen that in the wild stock market fluctuations. The most important thing we can do is to contain it as best as possible, prevent the outbreak from becoming even wider than it already is. From an economic standpoint, I think we need to look particularly at those people who don't have the luxury of telecommuting. If you work at a computer, as so many people in Washington or New York do, you can work from home. But what are we going to do for our mill workers, for our factory workers, for truck drivers, people who don't have the luxury to sit at a desk in their home and work? That's where I think we need to focus any economic relief on immediately, because if those people get sick or if their children's schools close, obviously that's going to have an economic impact as well. We want to make sure that those people who might suffer that harm through no fault of their own are held harmless.
Senator, last week we saw Chuck Schumer stand in front of the Supreme Court and make these comments about Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. Listen.
I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions.
Well, now dozens of conservative leaders like Senator Jim DeMint, Ed Rollins, Jeff Landry, and Charlie Kirk sent a letter to senators calling for his censure. What are your thoughts? Will that happen?
Yeah, Ainsley, I would sooner see Chuck Schumer stop filibustering the very important pro-life legislation that they blocked just a couple weeks ago to protect unborn children from grisly, depraved practices like late-term abortion or infanticide on the birth table. If they would be willing to do that, I'd be willing to forgive Chuck Schumer for those appalling remarks. But ultimately, that's what this is all about, is protecting unborn life.
Right, and let's talk about Afghanistan. We're beginning to pull out troops as early as today. As a guy that, as a warfighter yourself, who served in the infantry, what are your greatest concerns, or do you have any?
Yeah, so Brian, I obviously have concerns about trusting the Taliban. We should verify before we trust them at all, to borrow from Ronald Reagan. These troop reductions have, I think, already been planned for a while. General Miller, our commander in Afghanistan, has said the early reductions we had already planned and that he can manage any possible risk. We can continue counterterrorism operations and training, but I think we need to continue to focus on the Taliban keeping up their end of the bargain and making sure that Afghanistan does not once again become a terrorist safe haven from which attacks can be plotted against the United States.
How do we do that?
We have to watch conditions on the ground. Again, these early troop reductions have been planned for some time. If the Taliban is not keeping their word, if violence is increasing, then I think we have to relook at our commitment to that peace deal that was signed a couple weeks ago if we don't have a willing partner on the other side. I think we also monitor what's happening in the Taliban's commitments under that peace deal to negotiate with the Afghan government, because ultimately that's the only way that we have a viable, long-term, stable solution in Afghanistan, is for Afghanistan to negotiate among themselves and reach a political solution.
All right. Mr. Tom Cotton, Senator, sir, thank you very much for joining us live.
Thank you.
All right, go get him.